Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back in time to a world without cluttered kitchen drawers. Imagine a land bathed in golden sunlight, where the great Nile River is the source of life, and the concept of a spoon is still a distant idea waiting to sprout in the human mind. You are standing by the riverbank, feeling the cool mud beneath your feet. The air carries the scent of damp reeds and the faint perfume of blooming lotuses. This is Egypt, but an Egypt long before the great pharaohs, before the towering pyramids. And honestly, with the diet and hygiene of the time, you probably wouldn't survive the first week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to. Know where you're watching from and what time it is, so please leave a comment below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are squatting by a small fire, its flickering light dancing on the faces of your family. Dinner is ready, a thick porridge of barley and water, perhaps with a few pieces of dried fish if it was a lucky day. The aroma of cooked grain mixed with wood smoke creates a familiar scent of survival. But now comes a basic challenge: how to get the hot porridge from the pot to your mouth without burning your hands or spilling half of it on the ground. You have no spoon. The concept doesn't even exist yet. Your default tool is the one nature gave you, your hands. You cup them, trying to scoop up some porridge. But the hot liquid seeps through your fingers, leaving a searing trail and only a meager amount of food. It's inefficient and quite painful. You look over at the person next to you. They're a bit cleverer. They tear off a piece of flatbread, the hard, dry kind baked on hot stones, and use it as a small, edible shovel. This is a major step forward. The bread soaks up the porridge, serving as both a utensil and part of the meal. This technique became a common way of eating in many ancient cultures and still exists today. But it's not perfect. The bread can get soft and break, leaving crumbs in the pot. It's also useless for thinner soups. Your mind starts searching for a better solution. Yesterday, while walking along the river, you saw something. A river mussel shell. It had a curved, almost perfect shape. An idea sparked. The next morning, you return to the riverbank, your eyes scanning the water's edge. And there they are. A few empty mussel shells, bleached white by the sun, lying in the sand. You pick one up, feeling its smoothness and natural shape in your palm. It's like a small bowl with a handle. That evening, by the fire, you are the only one in your family not using bread or getting burned. You use your mussel shell, gently scooping up a perfect portion of porridge. It works flawlessly. It's a satisfying feeling.
Ow!
This is the moment of inception, the birth of a technology. Of course, you aren't the only one with this idea. Along the riverbanks and coastlines of the ancient world, people are making similar discoveries using what nature provides. Historians still argue whether the first spoons were accidental discoveries or intentional modifications of natural objects. Perhaps someone found a peculiarly shaped pebble and realized its potential. Or maybe they deliberately ground a piece of wood until it had the right shape. This process was slow, spanning thousands of years. The first spoons weren't mass-produced in workshops. They were personal items, found or simply made. A flat piece of bone with its edges smoothed, a pebble hollowed out by the river's current, even a large, sturdy leaf folded just so. These items were perishable and often discarded after use. That's why archaeologists rarely find direct evidence of these primitive spoons. They have long since decomposed, returning to the dust of time. What we find is the next step in the evolutionary process. The first attempts to create a dedicated tool. In pre-dynastic settlements, we begin to see carefully chipped pieces of flint that are shaped not just as knives or arrowheads, but with a form resembling a small scoop. They are crude, but the intention behind them is clear: to create something. For scooping, you start to experiment. The mussel shell is good, but it's fragile. You find a piece of soft wood, perhaps from a fig or acacia tree, and begin to whittle it with a sharp piece of flint. The work is tedious. You have no metal tools. You have to scrape and carve bit by bit, occasionally stopping to resharpen. Your stone tool After hours of work, you have a wooden object that vaguely resembles a spoon. It has a shallow bowl and a short, rough handle. It isn't beautiful, but it's yours. It's more durable than the shell and feels more substantial in your hand. You haven't just found a tool, you have created one. This is a cognitive leap. You are no longer dependent on what nature happens to provide. You are beginning to shape the world around you to meet your needs. And while your little wooden spoon may seem insignificant, it is a symbol of a larger shift happening along the Nile, the rise of ingenuity, the dawn of civilization. You might joke with your friends that your wooden spoon is cutting-edge technology, even if it still scoops a bit of sand into your meal. At least it's sand you scooped yourself. The crude wooden spoon you made is more than just a tool. It's an idea made manifest. And this idea, like seeds sown in the fertile soil of the Nile, is about to take root and grow. You are living at the dawn of the dynastic age, the beginning of what we call the Old Kingdom of Egypt. Society is changing. Small communities are merging into larger towns. Central authority, headed by a divine king, is beginning to shape the land. With this political and social change comes an explosion in technology and art. This is the age of the first great pyramid builders, testament to incredible human organization and engineering. And in the shadow of these massive projects, smaller, more humble revolution is taking place. The birth of the first true spoons. You no longer have to clumsily carve your own. There are now professional craftsmen. These men and women, with skills honed over generations, can turn a block of wood or a piece of bone into objects that are both useful and aesthetically pleasing. You walk into a bustling market in Memphis, the newly established capital. The air is alive with the sounds of buyers and sellers, the bleating of livestock and the smell of fresh bread and strange spices. Among the stalls selling grain, linen, and pottery, you see a carpenter sitting on a mat, surrounded by his bronze tool saws, chisels, and awls. Yes, bronze has arrived, and it's changing everything. It's much softer than iron, but compared to stone, it's a revolution. On a cloth spread before the craftsman are several wooden spoons. They are a far cry from your own clumsy effort. They are sanded smooth, their surfaces gleaming from being treated with oil. The bowl of the spoon is deeper and has a regular oval shape. The handle is longer, more slender, and fits comfortably. In the hand, you may even have a bit of simple decoration, a few parallel lines carved at the end of the handle, or a stylized shape resembling a lotus bud. They are still basic objects, but they are made with purpose and skill. They are no longer found makeshift items. They are manufactured products. You pick one up. It's light but sturdy. You can imagine using it to eat a lentil stew without fear of splinters or spills. Of course, they aren't cheap. A spoon like this might be worth several sacks of barley, so it's still a luxury for the average farmer. Besides wood, bone was also a common material. The bones of cattle, especially the leg bones, were large and hard enough to be worked. The craftsman would cut a section of bone, then carefully hollow out one end to form the bowl, and shape the other end into a handle. Bone spoons have a natural creamy white color and could be polished to a high sheen. A quirky historical tidbit is that some of these early bone spoons may have been made from the bones of the hippopotamus, the massive and dangerous creature of the Nile. Using a material from such a formidable beast may have carried some symbolic meaning of power or protection. These first spoons were primarily functional. Their design followed their use. The bowl needed to be deep enough to hold liquid, and the handle needed to be long enough to keep your hand out of the food. There were no complex decorations or strange shapes. All the luxury was in the material itself and the finish. A smoothly polished wooden spoon or a pristine white bone spoon was a status symbol. It showed that you could afford a specialized tool for eating, rather than resorting to makeshift means. It showed you were part of the emerging social order, a society that valued refinement and comfort. But these spoons were not just for eating. Find them in Old Kingdom tombs, placed alongside the other personal belongings of the deceased. Indicates they were considered essential for life in the hereafter. The Egyptians believed the afterlife was an idealized version of life on Earth. so you would need all your comforts, including a good spoon. A spoon placed in a tomb was not just an eating utensil. It was a prayer for eternal sustenance. While craftsmen were perfecting these simple spoons, priests and the elite were beginning to explore other possibilities. In temple rituals, special spoons were used to offer fragrant oils or grains to the gods. These spoons were often made of more precious materials like ivory or slate, and might have simple carvings related to the deity being worshipped. For example, a spoon used in the Temple of Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, might have a simple carving of a baboon Thoth's sacred animal on its handle. These are the first signs that the spoon is beginning to transcend its purely functional role to become an object of symbolic and artistic meaning. It's quite a step up from just worrying about not burning your tongue. Now you could worry about whether your spoon was formal enough for the gods. A whole new kind of social pressure. The development of hieroglyphic writing during this period may also have influenced spoon design. Symbols and signs began to appear on everything from temple walls to pottery. Although Old Kingdom spoons were still relatively simple, the idea of carving an image onto an object to convey a meaning was established. The groundwork was being laid for the artistic explosion that would take place in later kingdoms. You, with your polished wooden spoon, are standing at a crucial turning point. We're witnessing the transformation of a tool from a necessity of survival into an expression of culture, status, and belief. The spoon has stopped being an answer to the question, how do I eat? And started to become an answer to the question, who are we? The fact that you own a polished wooden spoon is no longer just about convenient eating. It has become a sign. In the increasingly structured society of the Old and Middle Kingdoms, every object you owned said something about your place in the cosmic order. Your spoon, however humble, was no exception. It whispered to those around you that you had the means to rise above basic survival, but for the highest echelons of society, high officials, priests, and the royal family itself, a simple wooden spoon was not enough. Their utensils needed to be not just functional, they needed to convey power, sanctity, and absolute distinction from the common folk. This is when the spoon began its journey to becoming a true ritual item and status symbol. Imagine, you are no longer an ordinary citizen in Memphis. Instead, you are a high official in the court of a pharaoh. Your life revolves around complex ceremonies and a rigid hierarchy. Every morning, you don't just eat a simple meal. You participate in a ritual. And for that ritual, you need the proper props. Your eating spoon is no longer made of common acacia wood. It might be crafted from ebony imported from Nubia, a rare and glossy black wood, or even ivory, taken from elephants in distant lands. These materials were not just beautiful and durable. They were proof of Egypt's wealth and reach, its ability to command luxury goods from the far corners of the world. The designs also began to change. Instead of a simple straight handle, you might find one terminating in the shape of a budding lotus flower, a symbol of rebirth and creation. Or perhaps the shape of a duck, its head gracefully turned back. These decorative motifs were not random. They were drawn from Egypt's rich symbolic vocabulary, each image carrying a layer of meaning. The lotus evoked eternity. The duck was a symbol of abundance. Using these spoons at lavish banquets was a way for the elite to reinforce their status. When you invited other officials to a feast, and they saw you using such fine utensils, the message was clear. You were an important person, favored by the gods, and trusted by the pharaoh. It was a sophisticated way to show off, far better than just saying, "Look how rich I am." But the most important role of these fine spoons was in the religious sphere. In the temples, ceremony was the heartbeat of the universe. Priests performed daily rituals to maintain the cosmic order and balance, and to please the gods. One of the most important ceremonies was the opening of the mouth, performed on statues of gods and the mummies of the deceased. The purpose of this ritual was to magically animate the statue or mummy, allowing it to breathe, eat, drink, and speak. Historians believe that special spoons, often shaped like a small finger or hand, were used in this ceremony to symbolically touch the mouth of the statue, offering it the food of life. Additionally, spoons called amcia were used for offering incense. They were often shaped like an outstretched arm, with a hand holding a small bowl. The priest would place pellets of frankincense or myrrh in the small bowl, burn them over a brazier, and let the fragrant smoke ascend, carrying prayers to the gods. This design was both symbolic and practical. The long arm kept the priest's hand from being burned. Owning or using such a spoon connected you directly to the divine world. It was no longer an eating utensil. It was a bridge between mortals and the eternal, the division between the spoons of the rich, while the poor became increasingly pronounced. While a farmer might be lucky to own a crude wooden spoon, a nobleman might have a whole collection of spoons. For different purposes, an ivory one for eating, silver one an extremely rare metal in ancient Egypt, even rarer than gold for special occasions, and an intricately carved slate one for personal rituals. A mainstream historical fact is that most of Egypt's precious metal objects were melted down long ago, which is why surviving silver or gold spoons are incredibly rare. But ancient texts mention their existence. These spoons also began to tell stories. A spoon might have the name and title of its owner inscribed on it. It became part of their identity, a personal item that would accompany them to the afterlife. Inscribing a name on an object was a powerful act in Egyptian thought. Your name, called Ren, was an essential part of your soul. By carving your name onto your spoon, you ensured that a part of your essence would endure forever with it. Spoon was not just a possession, it was an extension of your being. This development shows an increasingly complex and nuanced society. The choice of a spoon was no longer based solely on practicality. It involved aesthetics, symbolism, and self-expression. Would you choose a spoon with a papyrus-shaped handle, a symbol of Lower Egypt, or one with a lotus, a symbol of Upper Egypt? Your choice might reflect your family origins or your political allegiances. The spoon had become a fashion accessory, a personal statement. It's funny to think that something that began as a shell picked up by the river could now carry so much political and social weight. It shows that once basic needs are met, humans have an infinite capacity to assign meaning and complexity to the most ordinary objects of life. And this process was only just beginning. The collapse of the Old Kingdom was followed by a period of instability and division, known as the First Intermediate Period. But from that chaos, a unified and strong Egypt re-emerged, ushering in the era of the Middle Kingdom. This was a time of renaissance in literature, art, and the refinement of craftsmanship. This newfound stability and growing prosperity created the perfect environment for the further development of everyday objects, including our humble companion, the spoon. The Old Kingdom laid the foundation, the Middle Kingdom built upon it, with confidence and a more sophisticated aesthetic sense. Now, you are an artisan living in Thebes, the new center of Egyptian power. You are not just a carpenter or a bone carver anymore. You are a specialist in precious materials. Workshop might be small, but it's filled with treasures. Creamy elephant tusks shipped from the south, blocks of smooth gray slate mined from the eastern desert quarries, and perhaps even ingots of soft, easily carved steatite. Your clients are officials, priests, and wealthy families who don't just want a spoon. They want a small work of art. Ivory remained the most favored material for high-end spoons, but the designs became much more complex than the simple lotus. Buds of the previous era might spend weeks crafting a single spoon. The handle was no longer an afterthought, it became the focus. A popular trend during this period was to carve the handle into the shape of animals in a more naturalistic way. Instead of a stylized symbol, you might create a leaping gazelle, its muscles taut, or a swimming fish, its scales meticulously carved. The height of this skill was to create a small narrative right on the handle. For example, a hound chasing a gazelle along the length of the handle with the spoon's bowl as the final destination of the chase. These spoons were not just for display, they were miniature vignettes, capturing the life and energy of the natural world. Another material that became popular was slate. This dark gray sedimentary rock, when polished, has a subdued, elegant beauty. It is harder than wood or bone, allowing for very fine details to be created without fear of breakage. Slate spoons were often flatter and more decorative, perhaps. Used for dry powders or cosmetics, rather than hot soups, artisans would often engrave complex scenes onto the flat surface of the spoon, such as a papyrus marsh with birds flying and fish swimming, all rendered in a space of just a few square inches. Historians still argue about whether these ornate spoons were actually used or if they were purely display items. A form of portable art. The sophistication wasn't just in the material and carving. Middle Kingdom artisans also began to experiment with composite techniques. A spoon might have a bowl made of ivory, but a handle made of ebony, creating a striking color contrast. Sometimes, small parts of gold or silver would be added as accents, a gold ring around the neck of the handle, or a small piece of silver inlaid to form the eye of an animal. This combination of materials required a high level of skill and indicates society with enough resources for artisans to specialize and experiment. One of the most characteristic designs to emerge during this period was the shape of a human, hand holding the spoon's bowl. The handle would be carved like an arm, and the bowl was held in the palm. This design might be related to offering rituals, similar to the amcier spoons of the Old Kingdom, but it also has an intimacy and directness. It's like a hand offering you food or ointment. Quirky tidbit is that some spoon handles were even crafted in the shape of dwarfs, who were often depicted in Egyptian art as cheerful attendants and sometimes associated with Base, the protector, god of the household. The development of the spoon in the Middle Kingdom reflects a cultural confidence. The Egyptians were no longer just looking inward for inspiration, they were trading more widely, and influences from Minoan, Crete, and the Levant can be seen in some decorative motifs. Despite this, the art of spoon making remained distinctly Egyptian. The main themes were still the Nile, its flora and fauna, and their gods. The spoon had become a miniature canvas for expressing Egyptian identity. This sophistication also had its downside. The gap between the elite and the common people widened. While you, as a royal artisan, were meticulously inlaying a tiny piece of gold into the eye of an ivory fish on a spoon, a farmer in a village not far away was still using a wooden utensil, almost indistinguishable from one made 500 years earlier. The spoon had become one of many ways in which social inequality was made tangible. Your work, however beautiful and skillful, also helped to reinforce a deeply stratified system. But you didn't have much time to reflect on that. An official just ordered a new set of spoons for his tomb, and he wants the handles in the shape of baboons reading a papyrus scroll. A strange request, but you'll make it happen, because you are one of the best. And this is the golden age of sophistication. You've seen the finished products, the polished ivory spoons, the intricately carved slate utensils. But have you ever stopped to truly picture the process of their creation? Step back from the museum galleries and splendid tombs and enter a place of noise, dust, and the smell of labor, the workshop of an Egyptian craftsman. This is where the real magic happened, where abstract ideas of beauty and status were transformed into tangible objects through sweat, skill, and endless patience. You are in a corner of the Karnak Temple complex, or in a narrow alley in Thebes. The air is thick with wood dust, stone dust, and the constant clicking, scraping, and tapping of tools. The workshop is not a large, clean space. It's a small roofed room or a walled courtyard, its packed earth floor covered with the debris of many days' work. The harsh Egyptian sun streams in, creating shafts of light and shadow where the craftsmen are hunched over their work. You would see men, and possibly women, sitting on low stools or directly on the floor, their bodies tensed with concentration. Let's follow the creation of a wooden spoon, the simplest kind. First comes the selection of the material. The master. Craftsman, a man with calloused hands but surprisingly nimble movements, examines a log of sycamore fig wood. He taps it, listening to the sound, looking for potential cracks or defects. Once satisfied, he uses a bronze saw to cut a piece of the right size. The bronze saw blade is not very efficient and needs frequent sharpening. The work is slow and strenuous. Once he has a rough block of wood, the shaping phase begins. Using a small adze and a chisel, the craftsman starts to hew the basic shape-hand oval at one end for the bowl and a long, straight section for the handle. This is work that requires strength, but also precision. One blow too hard could ruin the whole block. Next comes the finer work. The craftsman switches to smaller chisels and a curved knife to hollow out the spoon's bowl. The thin layers of wood are carefully shaved away. You can hear the rhythmic she, as the blade glides over the grain. Then, the handle is shaped, perhaps rounded or faceted. Finally, and perhaps the most time-consuming stage, is the sanding. The craftsman uses pieces of sandstone of varying grits and then fine sand to rub the entire surface of the spoon. Rubs and rubs for hours until every tool mark is gone and the wood surface is as smooth as silk. The final step is to polish it with a cloth soaked in linseed oil or animal fat, which deepens the color of the wood and protects it from moisture. The entire process for a single high-quality wooden spoon could take several days. Now, consider something more complex, an ivory spoon. Ivory is a much more precious and difficult material to work. It's hard and brittle. Another craftsman, a specialist in ivory, starts with a section of a tusk. He would use a special fine-toothed saw, possibly lubricated with wet sand to increase its cutting power to cut out the rough shape, to hollow out the bowl. He cannot use a chisel aggressively. Instead, he uses a drilling technique. By using a bow to rotate a flint or bronze drill bit, he can create a series of small holes close together, then use a small chisel to remove the ivory between the holes. It's an incredibly slow process that requires absolute control. A quirky fact is that Egyptian craftsmen invented the bow drill, a tool that allowed them to drill with much greater speed and precision than by hand turning alone. The carving of decorative details in ivory is where the real skill shines. The craftsman uses tiny bronze burins and engraving knives. If he is shaping a fish, he will carve each scale individually. If it's a flower, each petal will be carefully shaped. Any mistake is irreparable. There's no wood filler or glue that can hide a slip of the hand on ivory. This is why these master craftsmen were so respected. They were not just laborers, they were artists. They might spend their entire lives perfecting the skill of working a single material. The workshop was not just a place of individual work. It was a collaborative environment. One craftsman might specialize in rough shaping, while another was an expert in fine carving. A third might specialize in polishing and finishing. The most complex spoons, those that combined multiple materials, required the coordination of many specialists. A jeweler might be called in to add a gold detail. A stone carver might create a small decorative inlay. They exchanged knowledge, tools, and sometimes complaints about a difficult client. It was an ancient version of a modern office, just with more dust and fewer meetings. Hopefully, as night falls, the craftsmen pack up their tools. They sweep up the piles of sawdust and stone dust. The finished spoons are carefully wrapped in linen, ready for delivery to their wealthy owners. The ones still in progress are placed neatly on shelves, awaiting another day's work. Stepping out of the workshop and back into the cool evening air, you carry a new appreciation for the objects you once took for granted. You realize that behind every graceful curve, every fine detail, are hours of human labor. Knowledge passed down through generations, a passion for turning the raw materials of the earth into expressions of civilization. Throughout our journey, we've seen the spoon evolve from a simple eating tool to a status symbol and a ritual item. But there is one area where the Egyptian spoon reached the pinnacle of specialization and luxury, the world of cosmetics. For the Egyptian elite, both men and women appearance was not just a matter of vanity, it was linked to health, status, and even divine protection. Makeup, especially eye paint, was not just for beautification, but was also believed to have medical and magical properties, protecting the eyes from the harsh desert sun and the evil eye. And to perform these complex beauty rituals, they needed special tools. Enter the world of the cosmetic spoon. You are a noblewoman, living in a luxurious villa in Thebes during the New Kingdom. Your morning begins not with a meal, but with a lengthy beauty ritual. You sit before an ornate wooden vanity table, upon which are arranged small ivory boxes, alabaster jars, and stone bowls. Each container holds a different cosmetic: black coal powder for lining the eyes, green eyeshadow made from powdered malachite, and reed ochre lipstick. But how to get these precious powders and ointments out of their containers and onto your face with precision? Certainly not with your fingers. You need a specialized toolkit, and at the heart of that kit are the cosmetic spoons. These spoons are distinctly different from those used for eating. They are generally smaller, more delicate, and feature an incredible variety and creativity in their design. The bowl is often very small and shallow, just enough to hold a tiny amount of cosmetic. They are not designed to hold liquid, but to scoop and mix pigments. The handle is where the artistry truly explodes. The constraints of function are almost completely removed, allowing craftsmen to let their imaginations run wild. One of the most popular designs was the swimming girl, which we will explore in more detail later, but there were countless other variations. You might have a cosmetic spoon with a handle in the shape of a palm frond, each leaf meticulously carved. Another might be shaped like a monkey climbing a pillar to steal fruit from a basket, the basket itself being the spoon's bowl. These playful and lively scenes show another side of Egyptian art, one that is less formal and more personal. A quirky fact is that monkeys were often kept as pets in wealthy Egyptian households, and their mischievousness was a favorite theme. In decorative art, the materials used also reflected their luxury. Wood, ivory, and stone were common, but they were often cleverly combined. A wooden spoon might have its bowl made from a separate piece of ivory, or a slate spoon might be inlaid with pieces of white ostrich eggshell to create a pattern. Gold and silver details were also frequently used. Imagine holding a spoon made of ebony, with a bowl shaped like a blooming lotus. At the center of the flower, a small glittering gold bead. Holding such an object every morning would be a deeply sensory experience. The function of these spoons was also varied. Some had a round bowl, perfect for scooping coal powder. Others were shaped like a small scoop, ideal for mixing pigments with a bit of oil or water to create a paste. Some were even double-ended, with a bowl at each end, perhaps to hold two different types of cosmetics. Egyptologists believe that some spoons, especially those with grooves or holes in the handle, may have been used for dripping perfumed oils or eye drops. They were not just spoons, they were multi-tools of the ancient cosmetic industry. These spoons were not only found in makeup kits, they were precious objects, often given as gifts between friends or lovers. A finely carved cosmetic spoon could be a perfect wedding gift, a symbol of beauty and prosperity. They were also an essential part of the grave goods of women and men. The Egyptians believed you needed to look your best when appearing before the gods in the afterlife. Therefore, your entire cosmetic kit, including your most exquisite spoons, would be placed in the tomb with you, as a way of saying, "I will not face eternal judgment with smudged eyeliner." The existence of these specialized cosmetic spoons indicates a society with the time and resources to devote to personal care and luxury. It also shows a deep appreciation for craftsmanship and design. The artisans who created these objects were master artists, capable of turning simple materials into miniature works of art, full of charm and imagination. They are a testament to the fact that even in the most mundane activities, like putting on makeup, the ancient Egyptians sought to infuse beauty, meaning, and a touch of magic. And as you carefully use your gazelle-shaped spoon to get a little green eyeshadow, you are not just putting on makeup. You are participating in a long cultural tradition, a ritual that connects you to the gods, reinforces your status, and of course helps you look fabulous. We have journeyed through the ages, witnessing the spoon's evolution from a mussel shell to a crafted tool, a status symbol, and an exquisite cosmetic implement. But now, we have reached the pinnacle, the most glorious period of Egyptian art and power, the New Kingdom. This was the age of warrior pharaohs like Thutmose III and Ramesses the Great, an age of empire, unparalleled wealth, and monumental construction. And against this grand backdrop, the Egyptian spoon reached its zenith of artistic expression. Its transforming into miniature sculptural masterpieces. If there is a single design that encapsulates the ingenuity and spirit of this era, it is the swimming girl spoon. You've heard glimpses of it, but now it's time to admire it in its full glory. Imagine holding such an object in your hands. It is no longer a spoon with a decorated handle. The entire object is a sculpture. The handle is the form of a young woman, nude or wearing a short kilt, swimming forward. Her body is carved with astonishing naturalism and grace. Her hair in an elaborate braid, and the curves of her body elegantly rendered. Her arms are stretched out before her in her hands. Hold ... the spoon's bowl. The bowl itself is often in the shape of a duck, a fish, or sometimes a small lidded container. The meaning of this design is a subject of lively debate among Egyptologists. Some argue it is purely a graceful, sensual scene, a celebration of feminine beauty in nature. Others see a deeper symbolic meaning, the girl swimming through the water represented by the space. To offer a duck a symbol of abundance and love could be a metaphor for devotion, love, and rebirth. The duck was often associated with the goddess Hathor, the goddess of love, music, and joy. Therefore, the spoon could be an erotic object, a gift between lovers, or an item used in festivals honoring Hathor. Whatever the interpretation, the charm and complexity of these objects are undeniable. They are the perfect fusion of ergonomics, function, albeit decorative function, and sculptural art. But the swimming girl was not the only masterpiece. New kingdom artisans gave free rein to their creativity. You find spoons with handles shaped like a bouquet of lotus and papyrus, tied together naturally, with the bowl as a blooming lotus flower. Another complex design featured a musician, playing a harp or a flute, with the instrument and figure carved fully in 3 dimensions. There were spoons where the handle was a prancing calf, its hind legs on the ground, while its front legs were lifted in the air. A moment of pure joy frozen in ivory. The luxury of these spoons was taken to a new level by the use of rare materials. In fine techniques, wood and ivory were still the foundation, but they were often inlaid with contrasting colored materials. A wooden spoon might have details made from creamy white ivory, deep blue lapis lazuli, imported from Afghanistan, and red orange carnelian. The combination of these vibrant colors created incredibly catching and precious objects. An important historical fact is that the tomb of Tutankhamun, discovered nearly intact, provided us with the most stunning examples of these new kingdom spoons and luxury items, revealing the incredible wealth and craftsmanship of the era. One of the most famous spoons from Tutankhamun's tomb has its bowl flanked by 2 lotus flowers, with a handle in the form of a papyrus column topped with an image of Hay, the god of eternity. The entire spoon is an intricate wish for the eternal life of the young king. It shows that even the most personal items were imbued with religious and symbolic meaning. These were not mass-produced items. Each masterpiece spoon was a unique product, possibly custom designed for a specific individual, reflecting their tastes, status, and beliefs. The complexity of these spoons also raises a question: who made them? Certainly not ordinary craftsmen. This was the work of royal artisans, the best in their field, working in the workshops of the pharaoh or the great temples. They might have spent months or even years completing a single piece. They had access to the finest materials and were given creative freedom within the framework of Egyptian artistic conventions. It was an enviable position, but also a stressful one. Imagine being tasked with creating a spoon worthy of a pharaoh. There was no room for error. When you look at these masterpieces, you see the confidence of an empire at the height of its power. There is a playfulness, a freedom in the design that you don't see in earlier periods. Art was no longer just for solemn rituals and immortality. It could also celebrate the joys of earthly life, beauty, music, nature, love. The spoon, in its final and most glorious form, had become an expression of the Egyptian joie de vivre, joy of living. And while you would probably never actually use a swimming girl spoon to eat anything, it would be quite awkward. Just holding it is an experience. It connects you to a world of luxury, art, and sophistication that few civilizations have ever Matched, you have seen spoons as personal items, symbols of luxury, and works of art. But now, let's elevate their importance one step further. Let's leave the private space of the vanity table and lavish banquets and step into the most sacred space in all of Egyptian civilization, the temple. This was the home of the gods on earth, where the universe was kept in balance through daily rituals, and in this sacred world, even the simplest objects were imbued with power and meaning. The spoon, in this context, was no longer yours. It belonged to the gods. Imagine you were one of the high priests serving at the Karnak Temple in Thebes, a religious complex so vast it could hold 10 of Europe's great cathedrals. Your everyday is governed by a strict schedule of rituals. Your duty is not just to pray. You must care for the god as if he were a living king. This includes awakening the cult statue in its shrine each morning, bathing and clothing it, and most importantly, offering it food. The gods, like humans, needed sustenance. And you couldn't just place a plate of food before a god. The offering was a solemn ceremony, and every utensil used had to be pure and divinely crafted. The spoons used in the temple were in a class of their own. They were typically made of the most precious materials: gold, silver, electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, and highly polished hard stones like quartz or obsidian, put in ivory. While luxurious in the secular world, were often considered not durable enough or not pure enough for daily sacred use. These spoons were called divine spoons and were kept in the temple treasury, carefully guarded and only brought out during ceremonies. Their design was often deeply symbolic. The handle of an offering spoon might be carved into a symbol of the deity it served. For example, a spoon used in the Temple of Horus might have a falcon-shaped handle. A spoon for Amun-Ra might terminate in a sun disk. One of the most common and powerful designs was a handle in the shape of the Ankh, the symbol of life. When a priest used such a spoon to offer a liquid offering like honey or wine to the cult statue, it had a dual meaning. It was both physical nourishment and an offering of life itself. The bowl was often round or shell-shaped, primordial, forms suggesting creation and containment. One of the most important roles of spoons in the temple was in the offering of incense. As you know, incense smoke was believed to carry prayers and the essence of the offering up to the heavens. The spoons used for this, sometimes called handled censers, often had very special designs. The arm-shaped amcia spoon you saw earlier is one example. Another design might have a small bowl to hold the incense pellets, with a perforated lid to allow the smoke to escape, and a long handle for safety. Sometimes, these spoons were integrated into more complex ritual objects, combined with other symbols to create a powerful object. The difference between a divine spoon and a mortal spoon was not just in the material. A quirky fact is that temple utensils had to undergo complex purification and consecration rituals before they could be used. They were fumigated with incense, sprinkled with holy water from the Nile, and had incantations recited over them by priests to infuse them with divine energy. Once consecrated, they could never be used for profane purposes. If a divine spoon was damaged, it could not be thrown away. It had to be ceremonially buried within the temple grounds, a process known as the burial of ritual objects. Historians still debate the exact nature of some of the ritual spoons found. Some have very strange shapes, with bowls that are too small, or handles that are impractical, making one wonder if they were used for physical offerings at all, or if they were purely symbolic items held up before the god as part of a ritual. It's possible some were just models of real spoons, created specifically to be placed in the temple. Storerooms as a permanent offering. The use of these spoons reinforced the hierarchy of Egyptian society. Only priests who were purified and trained could touch these objects and approach the gods. The pharaoh, as the high priest of every cult, was the only one who could use the most sacred spoons. This created an insurmountable gap between the common people and the divine world. You could come to the outer courtyard of the temple to pray, but you would never see the secret rituals that took place in the sanctuary. And you would certainly never use a golden Ankh-shaped spoon. This was an effective way to maintain power. If you control the tools of communication with the gods, you control the people. When a major religious festival took place, such as the Opet festival, the cult statue would be carried out of its shrine in a sacred bark and paraded through the streets. This was one of the few occasions when the public could catch a glimpse of the temple's splendor. You might see priests walking before the bark, carrying sacred standards and ritual instruments, including the gleaming spoons. The sun reflecting off their polished gold surfaces would create a spectacle of awe and reverence. To you, an ordinary observer, those spoons were not just utensils. They were tangible fragments of heaven, proof of the existence and power of the gods you worshipped. Your life in ancient Egypt was always lived in the shadow of death. But for the Egyptians, death was not the end. It was a transition, a journey. To another world, the Duat, the underworld where life would continue in an idealized form. To make that perilous journey and to enjoy eternal life thereafter, you needed to be fully equipped. Your tomb was not just a resting place. It was a machine for rebirth, an eternal home furnished with everything you would need. And among the jars, furniture, clothes, and food, you would find spoons. Their presence in a funerary context reveals a great deal. It's about their importance to both life and the afterlife. Imagine the preparations for the burial of a great official. His body has been carefully mummified, a 70-day process to preserve his human form for eternity. His tomb, carved into the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings or built as a stately mastaba at Saqqara, is ready. Now it is time to fill it with grave goods. The family and priests carefully arrange the objects in a specific order. Chests filled with linen, jars of wine and oil, a bed, chairs, and even a dismantled chariot. And on a small table beside the sarcophagus, they place a set of dining utensils, a few pottery or stone bowls, and 1 or 2 spoons. Why would you need spoons in the afterlife? Simplest answer is that you would need to eat. The Egyptians believed that the spirit of the deceased, the Ka, needed to be nourished, just like a living person. Offerings of food and drink would be brought to the tomb regularly by the family. The tomb walls were also decorated with magical images of food, bread, beef, beer, vegetables, to ensure an endless supply. And to enjoy this eternal feast, you needed utensils. A spoon in the tomb was a practical guarantee that you would not have to use your hands at the banquet in the afterlife. It was a symbol of the continuation of a civilized life. The spoons found in tombs are very diverse, reflecting the status of the deceased. A commoner's tomb might contain only a simple wooden spoon, perhaps the very one they used in daily life. But the tomb of a royal family member, like Tutankhamun, was filled with spoons made of ivory, precious woods, and even gold. With the masterpiece designs you have seen, exquisite cosmetic spoons and ritual spoons were also included, indicating that beautification and religious practices were also important activities in the afterlife. However, the role of the spoon in the tomb may have been deeper than just for eating. Recall the opening of the mouth ceremony. This important ritual, performed on the mummy just before it was placed in the tomb, was intended to restore the senses of the deceased. Priests would use special instruments, including objects shaped like spoons or fingers, to touch the mouth, eyes, nose, and ears of the mummy, reciting spells to open them. Some of the spoons found in tombs may have been used in this very ceremony, and thus, they were considered powerful objects that had helped facilitate the transformation of the deceased. Burying them with the mummy ensured that their power would continue to be effective. A quirky fact is that archaeologists sometimes find spoons that were deliberately broken before being placed in the tomb. Historians still debate the reason for this act. One theory suggests that killing the object was a way to release its essence or spirit, allowing it to accompany the spirit of the deceased into the afterlife. Another, more practical theory suggests that breaking valuable items was a deterrent to tomb robbers. A broken ivory spoon would be of less value to a thief. Whatever the reason, this act shows a complex and ritualistic relationship with objects. Spoons placed in the tomb could also serve as a form of identification or a summary of the deceased's life. As you know, many spoons were inscribed with the owner's name and titles. This was not just for marking possession. In the afterlife, where you had to face the judgment of the gods, asserting your identity and status was crucial. The spoon acted as a kind of permanent name tag. Furthermore, the decorative motifs on the spoon, a hunting scene, a musician. A religious symbol could reflect the achievements, hobbies, or piety of the deceased, telling a miniature story. Of their life, the presence of spoons in tombs, from the simplest to the most magnificent, underscores their importance in Egyptian culture. They were not disposable items. They were long-term companions, personal possessions that carried a part of their owner's essence. They were important enough to be considered essential, not just for this life, but for the next. They were a bridge between the physical and spiritual, worlds between mortal existence and the promise of eternity. The next time you see an ancient Egyptian spoon in a museum, remember that it most likely spent thousands of years in the darkness of a tomb, waiting to serve its owner at a feast that never ends. It's a thought that is both eerie and poetic. So far, we have explored the glamorous roles of the spoon at banquets, in religious rituals, and as a fashion accessory. But there is another area of use, one less celebrated but critically important. For daily life and survival, medicine. In a world without bacteriology or antibiotics, Egyptian physicians developed a complex medical system that combined practical observation, surgical procedures, and magical incantations. And in their arsenal, alongside scalpels and needles, spoon played a humble but essential role. Let's turn our attention to a different place. Not a temple or a tomb, but a house of life per rank. These were institutions attached to major temples that functioned as libraries, scriptoriums, and, most importantly, as centers for medicine and the training of physicians. You are a physician, Swen, a respected member of society who possesses knowledge of herbs, minerals, and the human body. Patients come to you with all sorts of ailments, from headaches and digestive problems to injuries from work accidents. Your job is to make a diagnosis and prepare a remedy. In your study, on wooden shelves, are hundreds of carefully labeled jars and boxes. They contain your pharmacopoeia, dried acacia leaves, castor oil seeds, myrrh resin, powdered malachite, and even more exotic ingredients like hippopotamus fat, or crocodile dung, a real, documented ingredient, perhaps used as a poultice. Once you have diagnosed the illness, you need to prepare a precise dose of medicine. And this is where the spoon becomes invaluable. Medical spoons did not need to be as magnificent as ritual spoons. They were made of durable, non-reactive, and easy-to-clean materials, such as bronze, slate, or hard wood. Functionality was paramount. Most importantly, they served as standard measuring tools. Ancient medical texts, such as the Ebers Papyrus and the Edwin Smith Papyrus, contain hundreds of recipes for remedies, often specifying dosages in spoons. A recipe might call for 1 spoon of honey, half a spoon of acacia powder, and so on. This suggests that there was a common understanding of the volume of a standard spoon, at least within the medical community. This was a crucial step towards quantitative and repeatable medicine, one of the cornerstones of modern science. The design of these spoons often reflected their use. You would have a range of spoons of different sizes for different dosages. Some might have very deep bowls for measuring liquids, while others were shallow and wide for handling powders. Some special spoons might have a small spout on one side of the bowl, making it easier to pour liquid medicine into a patient's mouth or onto a wound. This was an intelligent and practical design. Besides measuring, spoons were also used for mixing and grinding. A physician might use a hard stone spoon to crush dried herbs in a small mortar. He would then use the same spoon to mix the ground powder with honey or beer to form a paste that could be swallowed. Spoons were also used to apply ointments and poultices directly to the skin. Using a spoon instead of fingers not only kept the physician's hands clean, but could also help apply the medicine more evenly and avoid further contaminating the wound. Although they didn't understand germs, they perhaps recognized through experience that cleanliness improved outcomes. A quirky, but slightly gruesome fact is that Egyptian physicians were also skilled dentists. They could treat dental abscesses and gum diseases. Very small spoons, almost like modern curettes, may have been used to clean out tooth cavities or to apply pain-relieving medicine directly to the affected area. Archaeologists have found skulls showing signs of complex dental procedures. Small spoon-like instruments were undoubtedly part of that. Dental toolkit. Historians still debate the extent of the overlap between medical spoons and cosmetic spoons. Both were used to handle powders and ointments. Coal powder, used to line the eyes, was originally made from galena lead sulfide, substance that actually has antibacterial properties and could help prevent eye infections caused by flies and sand.
Therefore,
a spoon used to apply coal could be considered both a cosmetic and a medical tool. The line between cosmetics and pharmaceuticals was not always clear in the ancient world. The spoon you used for beautification could also be the thing that was protecting you from disease. Once you, as the physician, had prepared your remedy, you would give it to the patient, perhaps in a small cup along with a clean spoon for them. To drink it, this act of giving medicine also had a symbolic meaning. It was not just a chemical transaction, it was an act of healing, a transfer of hope. The spoon, in that moment, was the intermediary of healing. It may not have glittered like the golden spoons in the temple, but to a person in pain, a simple, bronze spoon carrying a dose of relief was perhaps the most precious object in the world. It represented knowledge, care, and the constant human struggle against sickness and death. We have spent a lot of time in the palaces, temples, and villas of the elite. We have admired spoons of gold and ivory, works of art worth a fortune.
apt.
What about the other 99% of the Egyptian population? The farmers, craftsmen, soldiers, and fishermen, the people who built the pyramids and fed an empire, what did they eat with? It's time to leave the world of splendor and travel to the mud brick villages and humble homes to learn about the commoner's spoon. You are no longer a nobleman or a priest. You are a farmer named Nakt, living in a small village by the Nile. Your life is dictated by the rhythm of the river, the season of inundation, the season of planting, and the season of harvest. Your house is made of sun-dried mud bricks, with a few small rooms and a roof of reeds. The furniture is sparse, a few reed mats for sleeping, some pottery jars for water and grain, and a simple hearth in the corner of the courtyard. Life is simple and hard. Do you own a spoon? Probably, but it would be a far cry from anything we've seen so far. Your spoon is almost certainly made of wood, not imported ebony, but locally available sycamore fig or acacia wood. It might have been whittled by you in your spare time, or bought from a village carpenter for a few measures of grain. It would not be polished to a high sheen or have intricate carvings. It would be a purely functional object, a bowl deep enough to scoop your thick porridge or lentil stew, and a handle sturdy enough not to break. It might have a few cracks and be discolored from heavy use. It is not a work of art, it is a tool. Or perhaps you don't have a wooden spoon. Many commoners continued to use more primitive methods. They used pieces of flatbread to scoop their food, an effective and cost-free method. They might also use carefully selected river mussel shells, just like their pre-dynastic ancestors. Another option was pottery. A village potter could create spoons from fired clay. They were cheap but very fragile. One hard knock and your dinner would have an extra earthy flavor. An important historical fact is that due to their organic nature and low value, the spoons of the common people rarely survive in the archaeological record. Wood rots, and broken pottery gets thrown away. That's why museums are filled with magnificent examples from the tombs of the rich, but have very few artifacts from the daily life of the poor. Archaeologists have to rely on other clues, such as depictions and tomb paintings, which often idealized life were rare finds from workmen's settlements like Deir el-Medina, the village of the craftsmen who built the Valley of the Kings. In places like Deir el-Medina, we get a more realistic glimpse. Archaeologists have found simple wooden spoons, some with their owner's name inscribed in crude cursive strokes, not the formal hieroglyphs, but hastily written hieratic. This shows that even for a workman, the spoon was a personal possession. In a community living and working in close quarters, marking your tools makes sense. It helps avoid confusion and perhaps minor quarrels about who took whose spoon. Imagine coming home after a long day of cutting stone in a hot tomb and someone has made off with your spoon. It would certainly not be a pleasant situation. Were these spoons decorated rarely, and if so, very simply? Perhaps a few incised lines at the end of the handle, or a clumsy attempt to shape it like an animal's head. This was not the work of a royal artisan, but of an ordinary person trying to add a little beauty to an austere life. These humble decorative efforts are perhaps more moving than the ivory masterpieces. They speak to a universal human desire, to create things that are not just useful, but also pleasing to the eye. Even with limited resources, historians still debate how common spoons were in the poorest households. It's possible that for many families, owning a spoon for each member was an unnecessary luxury. Perhaps the whole family shared 1 or 2 spoons, or only the adults had spoons, while the children still used their hands. Or it could be that the concept of individual eating utensils didn't exist at the lowest strata. People would eat from a common pot, using bread in their hands. The spoon, even in its simplest form, may still have been a sign of a certain level of prosperity. The life. A farmer knack spoon was very different from the life of a ritual spoon. It was not kept in a precious box. It lay on a mud brick ledge, or was tucked into a basket with other tools. It was used 3 times a day, scoured with sand and river water, and perhaps occasionally chewed by the dog. It was part of the fabric of daily life, a silent witness to family meals, conversations, and the passing of the seasons. When it broke or wore out, it would be used as kindling, and another would take its place. There was no ceremonial burial for the commoner's spoon. Its legacy is not in museums, but in the nourishment it helped provide. In the continued existence of the family and the community, Egyptian civilization, however powerful and ancient, did not exist in a vacuum. For centuries it interacted, traded, and sometimes clashed with other cultures in the Levant, Nubia, and the Aegean Sea. But no encounter had as profound an impact on the final centuries of native Egypt as the conquest. By Alexander the Great, in 332 BC, his arrival ushered in a new era, the Ptolemaic period. Egypt was now ruled by a dynasty of Greek pharaohs, starting with Ptolemy I, one of Alexander's generals. This marriage of Greek and Egyptian cultures created a vibrant hybrid society. This was reflected in everything from architecture to art, and of course, spoons. You are living in Alexandria, the newly founded capital city on the Mediterranean coast. It is a cosmopolitan metropolis, a center of learning, commerce, and culture. In its streets, you hear Greek spoken as much as Egyptian. You see temples, built in the traditional Egyptian style, alongside public buildings in the Greek architectural style, with Corinthian columns. In this mixed world, even the most familiar objects began to change. The Ptolemaic spoon is a perfect example of this cultural fusion. The Greeks brought their own metalworking traditions. They were masters of bronze and silver work, and they introduced new shapes and styles. The classic Greek spoon ligula, or cochlear, typically had a small pear-shaped or circular bowl and a straight pointed handle. The pointed end was used to spear food, such as snails or mussels, making it a versatile tool. As Greek craftsmen settled in Egypt, they began to produce these spoons for the growing Greek community. At the same time, Egyptian traditions continued. Egyptian artisans still crafted spoons from wood and ivory with familiar motifs lotus flowers, papyrus, and religious symbols. However, a crossover began to occur. You might see a spoon with a basic Greek shape around bowl and a straight handle, but the handle would be decorated with an Egyptian symbol, such as a uraeus cobra or a small ankh. Or conversely, a spoon with an overall Egyptian shape might be decorated with a Greek meander pattern. An interesting development during this period was the increase in spoons with inscriptions of dedications or wishes in Greek. A silver spoon might be given as a gift, with the inscription "to my friend," or a wish for good health. A mainstream historical fact is that the Great Library of Alexandria fostered a culture of scholarship and literacy, and this may have spread to everyday objects. Owning an item with writing was not just a sign of wealth, but also of education. In the religious sphere, syncretism was pronounced. Egyptian and Greek gods began to merge. The Egyptian god Serapis, a combination of Osiris and Apis, was created under Ptolemy I to appeal to both Egyptians and Greeks. Ritual implements, including spoons, also reflected this blend. Ritual spoon might be used in a temple to Serapis, and it could bear both Greek symbols like a laurel branch and Egyptian ones like a feather of mat. However, this cultural fusion mainly took place in the major cities like Alexandria and among the upper classes. In the rural areas, the life of the Egyptian farmer did not change much. They still worshipped the old gods, spoke Egyptian, and used simple wooden spoons just like their ancestors. Historians still debate the extent to which Greek culture actually penetrated the lives of the common Egyptian people. Perhaps for a farmer in Upper Egypt, the change of dynasty in the distant capital meant little, and his spoon remained unchanged in its form and function. As Rome began to rise as the dominant power in the Mediterranean, its influence also began to be felt. In Egypt, after the death of Cleopatra VII, the last Ptolemaic pharaoh in 30 BC, Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire. Now, a new layer of cultural influence was added. Roman spoons, similar to Greek ones, became common. Bronze became the material of choice for most everyday utensils, as it was cheaper than silver, but more durable than wood. Mass-produced bronze spoons with fairly standardized designs began to replace individually crafted ones. The arrival of Christianity in the following centuries brought the final and most profound change. The old polytheistic religion of Egypt was gradually replaced. Temples were closed or converted into churches. The ancient symbols, the ankh, the lotus, the Eye of Horus lost their religious meaning and were seen as signs of paganism. The Egyptian spoon, with all its rich symbolic heritage, gradually disappeared.
Ow.
In its place came simpler spoons bearing Christian symbols such as the cross or the fish. Some ritual spoons used in the early Christian liturgy, called cutlery, were used to administer the Eucharist. The 3,000-year journey of the Egyptian spoon, from a mussel shell to a work of art, had come to an end, giving way to new forms and new meanings. Every empire falls. Every religion transforms, and every artistic tradition, no matter how brilliant, eventually fades or changes beyond recognition. The long and glorious journey of the Egyptian spoon, spanning more than 3 millennia, was no exception to this grim law of history. A combination of political, religious, and economic factors gradually eroded and finally extinguished this unique tradition, leaving a legacy that is both tangible and forgotten. The decline did not happen overnight. It was a process that lasted. For centuries, as you have seen, Greco-Roman influence had already begun to standardize and simplify spoon design. The utility and mass production of Roman bronze spoons gradually triumphed over individually crafted artistic spoons. Why pay a high price for an intricately carved ivory spoon when you could buy a much cheaper and more durable bronze one? Simple economics began to win out over art. For most people, a spoon was just a tool, and the most efficient tool is often the one that wins. But the real death blow came from religious change. The rise of Christianity, and later Islam in Egypt, completely changed the belief system that had shaped this civilization for thousands of years. The polytheistic religion of the pharaohs, with its complex system of symbols, the ankh, the lotus, the scarab, the Eye of Horus, was condemned as pagan. Temples were closed, rituals were banned. And the royal workshops that once produced exquisite ritual items no longer had a reason to exist. The spoon, so closely tied to these symbols and rituals, lost much of its meaning. A swimming girl spoon was no longer a sensual symbol of the goddess Hathor. It became an inappropriate nude figure. A spoon with an ankh was no longer a prayer for eternal life. It was a relic of a dead faith. As a result, the skills to create these masterpieces gradually faded away. The master craftsmen no longer had apprentices to whom they could pass on their knowledge.
Ow.
New generations grew up in a different world, with different symbols and values. Within a few hundred years, the ability to carve a leaping gazelle on the handle of an ivory spoon had vanished from Egypt. The tradition was broken. So what is the legacy of the Egyptian spoon? Did it disappear completely? Not exactly.
Although,
The specific forms died out, some basic ideas survived and spread. Egypt was a crossroads of the ancient world, and its designs influenced neighboring cultures. Some scholars argue that the decorative spoon designs of the Copts Egyptian Christians, with their geometric patterns and cross motifs, still retain some influence from the layout and techniques of their pharaonic predecessors. Further afield, the influence is more subtle. Through the Roman Empire, some basic spoon shapes originating in the Mediterranean, including Egypt, spread throughout Europe. Although the medieval European spoon had its own form and function, it is undeniable that the idea of a specialized, sometimes decorated, eating utensil has deep roots in the first ancient civilizations, in which Egypt played a pioneering role. A quirky fact is that during the Renaissance, when Europe rediscovered classical art and literature, some artists were inspired by the grotesque motifs found in Roman ruins, which were in turn influenced by Egyptian decorative art. Could a curve on a Renaissance silver spoon be a distant echo of an Egyptian papyrus reed? It's a fascinating thought, but the most tangible legacy of the Egyptian spoon lies in its very forgetting. For more than 1,000 years, these treasures lay silent in the sand, buried in forgotten tombs in collapsed cities. The world had forgotten their existence. The great pyramids and temples remained, but the fine details of daily life had vanished from human memory. The stories these spoons told of feasts, rituals, love, and medicine were silenced. Their legacy was a void, a centuries-long silence, awaiting a new era of discovery. For you, a person living in this period of decline, you might feel a sense of melancholy. You might find an old, chipped ivory spoon in a market, sold as a strange curio. You might admire its craftsmanship, but not fully understand the meaning of the gazelle carved on it. It belongs to another world, a world of gods and beliefs you no longer share. The spoon has become an artifact in its own homeland, a reminder that even the greatest civilizations are but a grain of sand in the desert of time. Its silence is sad, but it also set the stage for a spectacular rebirth, a discovery that would astonish the world centuries later. The silence lasted for centuries. The spoons, along with countless other treasures of ancient Egypt, lay dormant beneath the sand. The world moved on. Empires rose and fell. The Middle Ages, the Renaissance, then the Age of Enlightenment. Egypt was still there, but its glorious past was a vague legend, known through the Bible and classical Greek authors. It wasn't until the late 18th and 19th centuries that a combination of military ambition, scientific curiosity, and personal greed began to lift the veil of time, ushering in the age of Egyptology and the spectacular rediscovery of the forgotten spoons. It all really began with Napoleon Bonaparte. His invasion of Egypt in 1798, though a military failure, was a resounding cultural success. Napoleon brought with him not only soldiers, but also an army of 167 scientists, scholars, and artists. Their mission was to document every aspect of Egypt, from its nature to its ancient monuments.
Oh.
The result was the Description de L'Edge, a monumental work that sparked a wave of fascination with Egypt, or Egyptomania, throughout Europe. It was during this expedition that the Rosetta Stone was discovered, the key that would finally unlock the mystery of hieroglyphs. You are now an early 19th century European adventurer, swept up in the Egyptian fever. You arrive in Alexandria, a changed city, but one that still holds traces of the past. Armed with knowledge from classical texts and the drawings in the Description de l'Egypte, you begin your treasure hunt. This was a chaotic time, the Wild West of archaeology, where few rules. Diplomats, adventurers, and opportunists like Giovanni Belzone competed fiercely to collect antiquities for the nascent national museums in London, Paris, and Berlin, or for their own private collections. In this context, the spoons began to reappear. As tombs that had been overlooked by ancient robbers were opened, smaller, more delicate items began to be found. At first, they probably didn't get as much attention as the colossal statues or golden sarcophagi. But to discerning eyes, they were unique windows into the personal lives of the Egyptians. You might buy an ivory spoon from an antiquities dealer in Luxor, unsure of its origin, but fascinated by its craftsmanship. You might be the first person in over 1,500 years to behold the form of a swimming girl. An important historical fact is that the development of Egyptology as a true science was slow. People like Jean-François Champollion, who deciphered hieroglyphs in 1822, provided the necessary context to understand the objects. Now, a spoon with an inscribed name was not just a decorative object. It was a historical document. Egyptologists, like Auguste Mariette and later Flinders Petrie, began to apply more systematic excavation methods, recording the location and context of every object found. They realized that the value of a spoon lay not just in its beauty, but in what it could tell us about its owner, its date, and its use. The pinnacle of this era of discovery was undoubtedly Howard Carter's discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922. The news electrified the world. For the first time, a nearly intact royal tomb had been found. And inside, among the countless gold and silver treasures, were the most exquisite examples of Egyptian spoon-making art the world had ever seen. The ritual spoons, the cosmetic spoons, each a masterpiece, were meticulously photographed, cataloged, and studied. They were no longer strange curiosities. They were the stars of a global exhibition. Historians still debate the ethics of this era of discovery. Many antiquities were removed from Egypt, legally or illegally, sparking debates about the repatriation of cultural heritage that continue to this day. The spoon you found might have ended up in a drawer of the British Museum, thousands of miles from the tomb it had lain in. However, it is undeniable that this collecting frenzy saved many objects from being destroyed or lost forever, and fueled the birth of a science that could decipher their stories. When you, as an early 20th century Egyptologist, carefully clean a wooden spoon found in a workman's settlement, you are doing a completely different job from the treasure-hunting adventurers a century earlier. You are not looking for gold. You are looking for information. This simple spoon, with its scratches and wear, tells a story just as important as the golden spoon of Tutankhamun. It tells of the lives of ordinary people. The rediscovery of the Egyptian spoon was not just about finding lost objects. It was the process of piecing together a lost world, one spoon at a time, one story at a time. And thanks to those efforts, we can take this journey through time tonight, and so our long journey is coming to an end. We have traveled from the muddy banks of the prehistoric river, where a mussel shell was the height of technology, to the noisy workshops of royal artisans, and finally, to the climate-controlled galleries of modern museums. We have seen a simple object transform into a tool, a status symbol, a work of art, a ritual item, and a bridge to the afterlife. The journey of the Egyptian spoon is the journey of Egyptian civilization itself, a story of innovation, sophistication, faith, and ultimately, legacy. Let's look back on the path we've traveled. You started by scooping hot porridge with your hands, a less than pleasant experience. Then, you had a brilliant discovery, a naturally shaped object that fit the purpose. From that mussel shell, the idea was born. The Old Kingdom, that idea, was shaped in wood and bone, creating the first functional spoons, a sign of order and nascent civilization. As society grew more complex, so did the spoon. It became a canvas for social status, crafted from ivory and precious stone. Distinguishing the rich from the poor, the priest from the commoner, in the splendor of the new kingdom, the spoon transcended. Functioned to become pure art. The swimming girls and ivory musicians were not just spoons. They were miniature sculptures, expressing the confidence and joy of living of an empire at the height of its power. At the same time, their humble cousins continued their silent but vital roles in the toolkits of physicians, measuring out healing, potions, and in the mud brick homes of farmers, providing daily sustenance. Every spoon, whether magnificent or simple, had a story to tell. We saw how the spoons served the gods in temples, made of gold and consecrated by ritual, and how it accompanied humans into the afterlife, an essential utensil for the eternal feast. And then we witnessed its slow decline as new cultures and religions arrived, bringing new ideas and new forms. until this great artistic tradition was all but forgotten, buried under the sands of time. Finally, we joined in the thrilling rediscovery in the 19th and 20th centuries, as these spoons once again saw the light of day, excavated by archaeologists, studied by scholars, and admired by the public. The journey of the spoon is a powerful metaphor. It shows how a culture expresses itself through the most ordinary objects. The Egyptians didn't just create a tool for eating. They imbued it with their deepest beliefs about life, death, the gods, and the cosmic order. They turned a basic need into an opportunity for beauty and meaning. A final fact to ponder. Despite the countless shapes and designs, the basic concept of the spoona, small bowl with a handle, has remained virtually unchanged for over 5,000 years. It is a nearly perfect design, a testament to the ingenuity of those first people who saw the potential in a seashell or a piece of wood. Now, as our story draws to a close, let these images settle in your mind. Let the rhythm of the narrative slow, like the flow of the Nile in the dry season. The sounds of the workshop have fallen silent. The lights of the banquets have gone out. The prayers in the temples are but an echo. All that remains is the silence of the desert and these beautiful, enduring objects. They have survived dynasties, invasions, and oblivion. They are messengers from a lost world, whispering their stories to anyone who will listen. As you drift off to sleep, perhaps you can imagine holding one of these spoons. Feel the weight of the ivory, the smoothness of the polished wood. Not just an artifact. It is a piece of human history, a tangible connection to the people who lived, loved, worshipped, and dreamed along the banks of the Nile so long ago. Let your mind rest. Let those images gently carry you into your dreams. Sleep well.